Hello, William Arnold here, coming to you pre-recorded. I'm going to be talking to you about my new book, Suburban Herbarium, and we're going to have a look at some of the prints from the series, and I'll take you on a little walk around and we'll look at some of the weeds from which the photographs in this book are derived. The photographs were made over a period of 5 years on a regular lunch break walk that I make from the college where I work as a technician and teacher of photography. The cover, which you can see here, utilises a photograph from an earlier series of work made on these walks using a large format camera and caffeinol developer made with the coffee from the staff room. We decided on this for the cover because I think it gives a good indication as to the kind of place where these plants come from. It's published by Uniform Books and contains a very nice foreword by author and naturalist Mark Cocker and an essay on sort of where the work sits within the kind of wider field of history of botanical photography by Professor Val Williams. The initial sort of inspiration for making this work came simply out of making the walks. For a long time, I've had this job for an embarrassingly long time, and I've been out at lunchtime trying to find some interest in what perhaps at face value is not the most interesting sort of place. It's so lots of identikit housing, business parks, a sort of very modern college facility, and not really the kind of place where one might necessarily go to seek out, I guess, maybe the exotic or kind of a wilderness place. But I've always been influenced a great deal by writers like Richard Mabey and much older writers like Richard Jefferies, who talk about these kind of fringe places that aren't countryside and then they aren't town either. So you hear them called edgelands or maybe some kind of bastard countryside. So in short, it's about finding the wonder in the overlooked, and particularly about plants, about this other important idea that you might refer to as plant blindness, which is to do with sort of a cognitive impairment where people are really only concerned with animal species. There's a zoological bias in conservation. It's quite hard to make people interested in plants often. So this work is about elevating the status of these weeds and hopefully persuading people to think about the importance of where this sits in a robust ecosystem. So I think the best thing to do here might be just to take a look at the book. So the next camera angle you'll see will be the book. I hope that works for you. This one of the Lords and Ladies is one of my favourites. Looks almost like a charcoal drawing. And so we can go on and on. So you might be interested to know a little bit about how these are made. As I mentioned, I work at the college as a technician and teacher of photography, and as such I have access to a nice dark room, so the plants, I pick them at lunchtime and then they're kept in water so they're fresh. I normally don't have time to print them there and then later in the day, in the evening, I'll make prints. So this is what the actual prints look like. I don't know if you can see that very well there, but I'll just hold it up. So they're all 12 by 16 inches, sort of the same, on fibre-based paper, Ilford matte fibre-based paper. They are what you'd call projection photograms, I suppose. So the actual plant specimen is placed. So I'll just take this bit of sage from the cut flowers here. So the plant specimens will be like this, and then they'll be sandwiched between two bits of glass on the 10 by 8 inch negative carrier, and then the enlarger will be switched on and the plant will be projected onto the baseboard, and then the print's made in the conventional way. Sage, nice. Prints made in the conventional way, make a test strip and all the rest. So what you end up with, as opposed to a contact print photogram, is lots of extremely fine detail. So when I put this together later on, I will put some of the prints up just on the screen so you can see the details and just how fine they are. What I might do is switch back to the other angle and I'll show you some of the real things. And then after I've shown you some of the real things, I'd quite like to actually, maybe we'll go outside. The weather's nice. Seems tragic to be in here doing this, so I can, maybe it's not the suburbs, so I live in the countryside, which has been very fortunate during this time, but I'll maybe find some scraggy areas where we can look at some of the weeds that I've made some prints of here, and I'll talk about them a little bit. And then in the final edit on screen, which you'll be watching, you can see the prints with the weeds and the information. I hope that works out nicely. Okay, so I hope this isn't a terrible angle and that you can see. So I'm just going to leaf through some of the original prints. I should say, I mean, they're all unique prints. I only make one by the occasional test, and this is how they've been stored. So it's fantastic now to have them in book form, because at present they just exist in portfolio boxes like this. So Cirsium arbenz, so common thistle, oxeye daisies, red clover, some meadowsweet, it's an interesting plant, sort of very strongly aromatic, was used actually apparently to as a kind of material on floors at one time. One of the speedwells, common field speedwell, blackberry brambles, Rubus fructicosus. There are, I think, something like 260 different kinds of blackberry bramble, amazingly. Lesser celandine, also known as pilewort. Apparently it has some positive effect upon that condition, which I can't personally vouch for that. Dog rose. So they're all these just incredibly beautiful but very, very common plants. Wood cranesbill, Santa Barbara daisy, a common kind of ornamental wall plant that's widely naturalised, especially in Cornwall. This is quite an interesting one of the navel wort, the little succulent round plants you often find on walls. Blackthorn, which is just finished blossoming, was amazing this spring. Solanum, the nightshade, so it's a bittersweet nightshade. you can see here, but you can see the little seeds in the projection which look very much like tomato seeds from the same family. Common ash, hart's tongue fern. This is just before it unfurls. And the hedge woundwort, which as the name suggests was once used for making poultices for wounds. These ones are in their protective sleeves, so we won't get those out, but I'll just leaf through a few more. Enchanter's nightshade, tuberous comfrey, this one Prunus avium, wild cherry, avium because the birds like them so much. Some dead nettles, water mint, and we can go on and on and on. So there are 100 in the book. I think in total maybe there are 130 or so of these prints. So the next thing, as promised, we're going to go outside and we're going to look at some of these weeds for real and where they grow. And before we go outside here where I live in the countryside, I think it'd be useful just to watch this old time-lapse video from a talk I gave a couple of years ago, which gives more of an indication of the actual habitat where these weeds come from. In a moment it will probably look rather more picturesque because it's a nice day, although I've tried as hard as I can to try and find the sorts of areas, like neglected areas, where these things would happen. I think in the end you might catch a little glimpse of me setting up for a print. There we go. That's that.
So you'll see just to the right of the frame there, the oxeye daisy, the one that describes almost like a child's drawing of a flower. So the introduced common landscaping plant, but they're actually highly invasive. So we'll look here, and then we'll go and look at my neighbour Simon's flower bed, where he's maybe put less time into weeding some of them out, and we'll see how they've taken over. So you'll see this hasn't been resown for several years, and the oxeye daisies have completely taken over. Maybe in the flower, they look incredible actually, but so a less picturesque area here where we might find something more akin to the environment we find with the Suburban Herbarium. So one we'll all recognise, and we've all probably had run-ins with while wearing shorts and sandals, Urtica dioica, a common stinging nettle. All parts of which actually are edible, and it's highly nutritious. Use it as a spinach substitute, makes quite nice tea. It's actually quite an important food plant for in the life cycle of peacock butterflies and small tortoiseshell butterflies. But it's hugely prolific, occurs anywhere where there's human habitation. Real mix of species in this neglected corner. See stinging nettle, narrow-leaf dock, blackberry brambles, creeping buttercups, lots of, herb robert, various grasses which I don't pretend to know about, some elm suckers, cleavers. There are two very common weeds here in this rubble. You see the red campion quite obviously, and also the forget-me-not. I think it's wood forget-me-not, much lower down, along with more herb robert. Red campion is one plant, you can find it at absolutely any time of the year in Cornwall, but it's in huge profusion in the hedges in May, as we are now. So again, this is much like some of the building sites where the specimens for Suburban Herbarium were collected. So we have the herb Robert here, which is in the geranium family, with many names. Stinking cranesbill, very pungent. Apparently I read somewhere it's supposed to be potential rabbit repellent, but I've yet to see any evidence of that. Also known as Death Come Quickly and Stinky Bob. So another weed with culinary potential actually, garlic mustard or Jack by the Hedge, Aliaria petiolata, which I have to say I've often really found it a little bit bitter to actually use, but it's a very common weed late April. Apparently in America it's an invasive species and they're trying to eradicate it. It just grows like nothing else. So just a little gone over now. Here we can see the oilseed rape, common agricultural crop, that's grown to an impressive size as a weed. And hiding in amongst the ornamental guians there's some common fumitory, which well, I hope everyone's had a nice time looking at a few weeds, and any questions, I think that's going to follow up now with Hannah chairing, and also hopefully Gem and I will talk about the Quarantine Herbarium Cyanotype project. Thanks for watching, I hope it was in some way useful.